Why did he not seek to seize it earlier? Were there not matters of policy or principle also involved? Let us take a look at some of the debates in China, first about domestic and then foreign policies. In domestic policy, the second plenum of the Ninth Central Committee met in Lushan in August of 1970, just a year and a half after the Congress of Alleged Unity of 1969, describing the victory of the Cultural Revolution. According to Mao Zedong, Lin Biao and Chen Boda, a leader and ideologue of the Cultural Revolution and Mao's personal secretary since the 1940s, carried out a surprise attack against the chairman. Supposedly, they wanted to restore the position of Liu Shaoqi as state chairman, with Lin Biao now as chairman. And they wanted to draft a constitution extolling Mao as a genius, praising him perhaps in order to send him on his way. The first was an attempt to keep state administrative power from reconcentrating in the more moderate hands of Zhou Enlai. Perhaps. The second may have been an effort to prolong the political fervor of the Cultural Revolution in opposition to Mao's desire to concentrate instead on the rebuilding of the party apparatus, if that was, in fact, his desire. All of this, quite frankly, is conjecture. In any event, we know that Chen Boda, Mao's secretary, was purged then and there, and Lin Biao seems to have made his hand clear, at least to others, in terms of his ambition. There were debates also in foreign policy, and in many ways more serious ones. If Lin Biao had sounded the clarion call for proletarian internationalism in foreign policy, he was, by 1969, 1970, no longer the chief foreign policy spokesman. Signs of moderation were emerging from Premier Zhou Enlai and the rehabilitated foreign minister, Qian Yi. In November of 1968, the United States and China reopened talks between their ambassadors in Poland, timed to coincide with the election of Richard Nixon as President of the United States. A foreign trade delegation, remember there had been none of these during the height of the Cultural Revolution, was sent to Eastern Europe in May of 1969. In September of 1969, the Soviet premier, Alexei Kosygin, met with Zhou Enlai at the Beijing airport to begin negotiations on their border dispute that had come so close to war. Ambassadors started to be appointed or reappointed. There was opposition to all of this, voiced obliquely in the press. Perhaps Lin Biao and his followers were opposed to the principle of dealing with major enemies such as the Soviet Union and the United States. We do know that Premier Zhou Enlai made it clear that negotiation did not mean cessation or opposition. He weathered criticism from the left, and his approach, of which Mao Zedong apparently approved, dominated Chinese foreign policy through the 1970s. So one could argue that by March and April of 1971, things were not going Lin Biao's way, both in domestic politics, where several decisions appeared to go against the wishes of him and his follower, and also in foreign policy, for it was about this time that the American table tennis team was suddenly invited to China. This was an outward manifestation of something going on behind the scenes in Chinese-American relations. In November of 1970, Zhou Enlai had told the American journalist Edgar Snow, an interlocutor between China and the United States, that Richard Nixon was welcome to visit China either as president or he could come as a tourist. An article relaying this conversation appeared in Life magazine in April of 1971, just when, apparently, Lin Biao was seeking to reverse this direction in foreign policy. This set the stage for the startling announcement in July of 1971 that Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's national security advisor, had visited China and had set up a visit for President Nixon to China for the following year. And just 2 months after Kissinger's visit, Lin Biao was gone from the Chinese political scene and presumably gone from this earth. It was evident from the extent of the purge that followed that it was not just the ambition of one man, but something that had a much wider basis, for half of the Politburo would be purged along with Lin Biao. And his demise and that of his followers would remove some of the more powerful obstacles in the charting of new courses in foreign and domestic policies.